Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I'm going to be doing part 4 of my series ranking F1 drivers from 2000 to 2025, basically a quarter century, ranking their Grand Prix performances using the results of my race rating model. And these are, of course, like I've always said, these are age and experience corrected, just to kind of help the drivers only in a couple years, when they were younger, and then of course left the series, because otherwise it's a little bit unfair when you rank against drivers who were able to race during their prime years, during their late 20s, early 30s. All right, now starting out with number 40. Number 40 is Paul di Resta, a career average of 0.033. For di Resta, 3 years in F1, all with Force India. Honestly, I thought he was not a bad driver. It was a bit surprising that he didn't get another year, 2014. But he did have a very poor spell towards the end of 2013, where he had like 4 or 5 races in a row where he didn't finish, and I think that took a lot of the momentum out of his sails. He also had a reputation for being a bit of a prickly guy to work with, which probably also didn't help. But for di Resta, I think he did compare pretty well to his teammates Sotto and Hulkenberg, and I think probably could have had like a 10-year Grand Prix career if things had worked out a little differently. Now, moving on to number 39 is Sebastian Buemi, career average of 0.039. For Buemi, he was really, in my opinion, a driver who was a victim of Red Bull's junior program in the early 2010s being extremely cutthroat. Basically, Red Bull had Ricciardo and Vern Reddy, and so they basically tossed their two current drivers at the time, Buemi and Alguersuari, aside. He basically drove pretty mediocre, pretty poor Toro Rossos for 3 years. Didn't really have a chance of promotion to the big team because, again, this was Red Bull was in their title-winning years. And generally, Red Bull, throughout their history, when they're doing really well, they're winning lots of titles. They don't change their driver lineup, and when they're not winning, they'll change it quite regularly. But for Buemi, a bit unfortunate with timing. Thought he was a pretty good driver. And a bit similar to di Resta, I think could have definitely had a much longer career in F1. All right, number 38 is Guanyu Zhou. So for Zhou, career average of 0.041. Now for Zhou, a bit of an interesting driver, a bit different from the last two that we just talked about in the fact I think he was not a particularly strong qualifier, but he made up for it with generally pretty decent performances in Grand Prix. Even last year, for example, at Sauber, despite the fact that he was out-qualified by his teammate Bottas by a pretty big margin, in the races he was actually finishing ahead of his teammate Bottas more often than not. Obviously, early in the season, it was a bit of a lottery at Sauber with their 1 minute long pit stops, but basically that got sorted out, I think, after the first quarter of the season. So Zhou, I think, at least showed that, at least in Grand Prix performances, he was a pretty clean driver, didn't get a ton of accidents. Of course, he had that one major accident at Silverstone his first year, but besides that, generally a pretty clean driver. I think if his qualifying performances were not so bad, I think he would still be in F1 this year. All right, now number 37 is Jacques Villeneuve. So for Villeneuve, of course, this is only looking at performance in the 2000s, so it doesn't include his title-winning year, 97, of course. For Villeneuve, very up and down, very inconsistent as well. I think early 2000s, he had some decent seasons up against Panis, against Zonta as well. But then I think later on, things kind of started to go off the rails. Poor seasons against Heidfeld, Massa, and I think Button as well. And never really was able to find the form that he had in the late 90s. But again, that being said, still shows up 37th on the list. So definitely still in the top half, just a little bit lower than what you would expect a world champion to be at. All right, number 36 is Nick Heidfeld, career average of 0.105. Now for Heidfeld, very, very strong career throughout the 2000s and a little bit into the early 2010s. He was a driver who I think was earmarked for a seat at McLaren. I think he was had received funding from McLaren before he started in F1. But of course, Kimi Räikkönen kind of came on the scene, and I think that was definitely obviously the right decision in hindsight. So Heidfeld never really had super strong championship winning cars, never got a race win. Does in fact have the record for most podiums without a win. But for Heidfeld, generally very stable, strong driver. But I would say a little bit off the top of the top. And so 36 I think is a pretty reasonable spot for him. All right, number 35 is Rubens Barrichello. Now, for most of this time period, of course, he was Ferrari's number 2 driver, of course, number 2 to Michael Schumacher. But for Barrichello, with a career average of 0.120, or at least career average during this time period, he did have some good years in there. I think 2008 with the Honda was pretty good. Honestly, 2009 with Braun, once he kind of got things clicking, the second half of the season was pretty good as well, and showed that there was still quite a bit of good speed there, and he was very, very close to Jenson Button as well. So again, I don't think, maybe if the start of 2009 had gone a little differently, maybe, who knows, maybe you end up with Barrichello as world champion, but still pretty good driver, but of course a little bit, off kind of the top drivers. All right, number 34 is Kamui Kobayashi. So career average of 0.163, and a bit similar to Buemi and DeResta, that I think he probably should have gone a bit more time in F1 than he actually got. His career qualifying performances were sometimes a little bit wanting. He was out-qualified by Perez in back-to-back years, 2011, 2012, I believe. Absolutely obliterated Marcus Ericsson in 2014, but again, in a very, very poor Caterham. Known for being a very, very good overtaker, Kobayashi was. I think, again, a little bit similar to Joe, where I think maybe if the qualifying performances were a little bit better, it probably would have helped his long-term chances of staying in F1. But I think, again, a little bit unfortunate that he lost his seat the way he did in 2012 in the first place, and then had to kind of go into that one-year role at Caterham before the team kind of collapsed on itself. Okay, number 33 is Christian Albers. So this is the last driver of the three whose results are really skewed by the results of Indianapolis 2005. Now, Albers, of course, a little bit less memorable for him, as he didn't get a podium in that race, but still picked up some good points in what was a pretty bad Minardi car. And of course, the race that only had 6 drivers. And so for Albers, it skews quite a lot of his stats. Didn't have quite a long career. I think did a couple more years, did 2006 with Midland. And then I think did the first half of 2007 and was, pretty comprehensively beaten by Adrian Sutil, which I think is a more true indicator of where he was. He was definitely, well below average, I would say. But just unfortunately, by inclusion of having Indy 2005 in that, the data, it basically skews things quite a bit. It means that Albers' scores looks a lot higher than it actually would be. But number 32, moving on, another rookie from this year is Gabriel Bortoleto. I believe he's actually the second rookie to show up this year. I guess third if you include Lawson. Career average of 0.186, and so this is for this season, but of course it's corrected based on the fact that he's rookie and based on his age as well. So for Bortoleto, I think he's had a decent rookie season. Race pace has generally been okay, a little bit slower than Hulkenberg, I think on average, I would say. Definitely hasn't been as opportunistic as Hulkenberg has, but I do think Hulkenberg's had a lot of good luck this year, which I think made the points difference between himself and Bortoleto look a little bit unreasonable. But that being said, I still think there's a lot of room to grow, and so the model, again, kind of predicting where it thinks Bortoleto could be in the future for his Grand Prix performance, says that, he could end up being a really, really good driver. But his career is still very, very young, and this could even, end up being higher. It could end up being lower. We're only going to have to wait and see with Bortoleto. All right, number 31 is Alex Albon. So career average of 0.19. For Albon, he's honestly had a pretty solid Grand Prix career so far. His Grand Prix performances have been pretty strong almost every season he's been in F1, with the exception, of course, of when he was Max Verstappen's teammate, as that will sometimes happen. Besides that, year and a half stint with Verstappen at Red Bull, where he did struggle quite a bit. He had a pretty solid stint in Toro Rosso, and then went to Williams, made pretty quick work of Nicholas Latifi, Logan Sargent. And this year, again, he's showing that he's a very capable pair of hands, even though it's looking like on the balance, Sainz might be the faster driver over one lap. At least over a Grand Prix distance. Albon's generally been the cleaner driver of the two, been involved in less incidents, and he's generally been more opportunistic in picking up points. So it'll be interesting to see how things go for 2026 if that trend continues, or if Sainz, who is kind of expected to be the better of the two drivers, if he comes out as the better driver in Grand Prix as well as in qualifying next year. But for Albon, at this point in time, 31st, a pretty good spot for him on this list. All right, number 30, a bit of an unusual one here, a bit similar to, I would say, Guang Yu Zhou, and that is Cristiano Mata. So for Mata, career average of 0.196, only did a year and a half basically in Formula One. Not a great qualifier, and so that does kind of mean that it's a driver that you would not think that would be this high on the list ends up being a little bit higher. And of course, very young, inexperienced when he first started. So again, when you do those kind of corrections, it does make a driver like Mata, who is generally regarded as not great, end up a little bit higher on the list. But for Mata, he was generally better than Panis, or at least very close in the Grand Prix. At least probably got, I think, a little bit fortunate with some of the reliability at the time. Maybe got some points positions that he otherwise wouldn't have because of poor reliability, but really had a year and a half at Toyota and then kind of went off, left the team, and that was that. So pretty short career for him, but still ends up relatively high on my list. All right, number 29 is Oscar Piastri, currently your F1 championship runner-up, or I guess not runner-up, but basically second in the championship as the season isn't finished yet. So you never know if he could be champion at the end of this year, even though as of recording of this video after the Brazilian Grand Prix, it's not looking so good for 2025. But for Piastri, I think he's been decent in Grand Prix performance. I do think that there's a little bit, still a bit of a gap there between himself and Lando Norris, which explains why I think he's a little bit lower down. But that being said, 29th is still a pretty good spot, still relatively young, and there's still, I think, Piastri has the work ethic and the drive that he can, keep improving, as generally the great drivers do generally improve at a rate that's greater than, I would say, average. And it's generally the drivers who don't have quite the work ethic. Sometimes they generally are the ones who don't improve as much as you would expect based on what their early career results are. So it'll be interesting to see how Piastri develops in the coming years. I think he's a very good driver, but I do think the Grand Prix performance could be a little bit better. Okay, number 28 is Scott Speed, another odd one here. Very similar to Cristiano Mata in the fact I think he was a pretty poor qualifier. I think got out-qualified by Vicentonio Liuzzi in their season and a half together. But the race performances were generally pretty good relative to the qualifying performances. And so that's how Scott Speed ends up 28th on this list. Did get some points early on in the 2007 Toro Rosso. That was a pretty poor car that first half season. And so for Scott Speed, again, really short time in F1 like Mata, I think only a year and a half. And so again, it's kind of correct. It's kind of, prorating what it thinks, he could have been able to do if he had a longer F1 career in terms of Grand Prix performance. So again, we'll never know. I think did a couple years of Formula E after, and actually wasn't even a couple years, it was like 4 races of Formula E, but yeah, hasn't really been seen on the single-seater circuit for much after his time in F1. Okay, number 27 is Jean-Eric Vergne. So career average of 0.213. Vergne was a driver who I think was pretty well known for being a guy who was not a fantastic qualifier. Hurt a little bit by the fact that he was a bit of a bigger driver, but very, very strong overall in Grand Prix. Very close to Ricciardo during their time together as teammates. And then was, quite a bit better than Kvyat, but still Kvyat was the one that ends up getting the promotion to Red Bull because he was seen as having the higher ceiling as he was the younger, less experienced driver. For Vergne, very similar to Buemi, and I would say Di Resta could have had a much longer career in F1, but just unfortunately the way that the Red Bull junior team operated at the time meant that he was basically kicked out of F1 without really any opportunity to get a seat elsewhere on the grid. But in hindsight, the fact that he was replaced by a combination of Sainz and Max Verstappen, two, of course, at this point, very, very strong drivers, means that, again, in hindsight, it's not a terrible move, but of course, you would look at other drivers on the grid and say, yeah, Vergne was probably better than quite a few of those who ended up keeping their seats into 2015, 2016. Okay, moving on to 26, and 26 is Jos Verstappen, of course, the father of Max Verstappen. For Jos Verstappen, career average, or at least not even a career average, an average during this time period, I should say, of 0.223. Had some not bad years there in Minardi and I think in Arrows as well. There were some years there where I think, at this point, the qualifying performance was not great. Didn't perhaps get a little bit lucky at times with the poor reliability of the early 2000s. Sometimes it could be really hard to control for that. but still, his Grand Prix performances during this time period were not awful. And so Jos Verstappen ends up 26 on the board. There's a couple, I think there's at least one or two more drivers to go who I think would fall into a similar camp as Jos Verstappen, where some of the poor reliability, the chaos from a statistical perspective means that there's a couple drivers who end up, I think, much higher than they really should be. And again, I'll mention that when we get to them. All right, number 25 is Carlos Sainz, career average of 0.236. Now, this season, of course, has been a bit of a tough season, but he's been a very, very solid Grand Prix driver since, I would say, 2017. The only real blemish in there, I would say, is the 2018 season at Renault, but shown he's a very solid, capable Grand Prix driver, not too far off the pace of Charles Leclerc. And I think I'd be really curious to see what he could have done in this year's Red Bull if Red Bull had actually gone and tried to sign him instead of basically re-signing Perez and then buying out Perez's contract and then being in the disaster that they've been in this year with their second seat between Lawson and Tsunoda. That being said, for Sainz, he has had a couple scruffy moments this year. He has had, I think, more incidents, contact with other cars, that kind of thing, than he would ideally wish. And that's really, I think, the one thing that's kind of holding him back from being potentially top 20 on this list. Okay, number 24 is Daniel Ricciardo. So for Ricciardo, career average of 0.245. For Ricciardo, what's really holding him back is those last 4 years of his career, the 2 years at McLaren and then the 2 partial seasons at Racing Bulls or AlphaTauri were much worse than basically everything that came before that. And so it really drags down his career average. Otherwise, I think he would definitely be in part 5 of this series, where you're looking at the top 20. But for Ricciardo, he was an excellent Grand Prix driver on his day. He had seasons like 2017, I would say 2014, 2016 as well, where he was, you can argue the best driver on the grid. Obviously, it's really, really hard to tell. A bit of a shame that he never had a championship challenging car at any point during his time in F1. Left Red Bull basically 3 years too early, and then of course was sacked from McLaren another 2 to 3 years too early for poor performance. So just missed out there in both counts. So again, a bit unfortunate for him. Just never really gelled with the ground effect cars the way he did with the turbo hybrid cars of 2014 and 2020, or even 2021. Although that year was not amazing. That first year at McLaren. So for Ricciardo, very sporadic, I'd say really wide range of performance from the great years, like I mentioned at Red Bull, and even 2020 at Renault was excellent, to the terrible years like 2022 at McLaren, even 2024. The qualifying performance was not great that year either. Okay, moving on to number 23, and it is Giancarlo Fisichella. Fisichella, career average of 0.251. Really the Sergio Perez of his day before Sergio Perez had his F1 career. He had excellent results in midfield cars, got a win in a very poor Jordan, of course, in the wet Brazilian Grand Prix 2003, and basically had excellent results in Benetton before that. In like the very early 2000s, of course, got that pole and that podium in the Force India in 2009 as well. So generally, the midfield years were very, very good. It was when he was driving for Renault 2005 and 2006 where he was kind of not so good. And it was miles off Fernando Alonso's performance, and again, that will take down his career average, but still generally very, very good Grand Prix driver. All right, number 22 is Robert Kubica, 1, of course. So this is from 2006 to 2010, not counting 2019. And for Kubica, career average of 0.275. I was a bit surprised that he wasn't in the top 20, wasn't able to get that into that portion of the video. But for Kubica, I do think that the Grand Prix performances at points were not necessarily bad, but I do think they could have been, a little bit better. So I think, for example, 2009 was a pretty poor season overall. I think, Heidfeld and him were very, very close. And again, I do think he was better than Heidfeld. And of course, Heidfeld's already shown up on this video, but still, I think he was a little bit off the pace of where he was performing in 2008 or in 2010, which I think were both really, really strong years. In 2007, again, it was his first full season, so understandable it wouldn't be as strong. But still for Kubica, 22nd on my list, and again, a case of what could have been, in the sense that, if he didn't have that injury, that rally accident, apparently had signed a pre-contract for Ferrari for 2012. Again, does he compete for the championship up against Vettel and Alonso that year? Well, we'll never know, unfortunately. All right, now last driver for part 4, number 21 is Pierre Gasly. Career average of 0.335. Very similar to what I would say about Gasly than what I said about Alex Albon. Generally, I said very, very strong Grand Prix career, except when he was teammates with Max Verstappen. So for Gasly, last couple years at Alpine have been pretty good. I think he had a couple wobbles. I think last year where, you could say maybe he wasn't performing up to, absolute the maximum. I think this year's generally been very good. I think there's been a couple weekends though here and there where I think it feels like he's kind of like hasn't been driving up to 100% just because he knows the car's been so awful. And so Colapinto's been, I think, a little bit close for comfort. But then you also have weekends like Brazil where, the car was able to perform, and, Gasly, I think, got very, very close to the maximum with that car. It'll be very interesting to see if we ever see Gasly in a front-running team again. I think he's obviously a much more mature driver, much more experienced than during that half season I had at Red Bull in 2019. I think that's always going to be a bit of a mark against him, and I think there's always so many young, exciting drivers coming up that I think it feels like, if a front-running team has a space available, it does feel like there's a lot of drivers who would be ahead of him on the queue unless circumstances kind of, went in his favor. So I think really his best hope would be that the Alpine team that he's at right now somehow becomes a front-running team, which, given how things have gone this year, does not look particularly likely. But, never say never. Williams went from basically a backmarker to basically second or third fastest car in 2014 with the help of that Mercedes engine. So I'm guessing Gasly's definitely hoping for the same next year with that Mercedes engine in the Alpine, which will definitely be quite strange to say and to see, when we'll talk about that in 2026. But yes, so that's the end of part 4, drivers 40 to 21. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.